Take it away.
Okay, well, okay. Looks like we're recording. Welcome everybody to the February 27th, at least where I am, version of the Backdrop user group meeting online. Today we have Alejandro, who's going to talk to us about creating custom entities. We will start out the meeting as we usually do, have everybody introduce themselves. I'm going to start and call on the next person, and if each person could just give a quick introduction, who they are, where they're from, and if they have some other short thing they want to say, go ahead. And then when you're finished, call on somebody else. My name is Tim Erickson. I'm St. Paul Tim on the internet, and I am in Deerwood, Minnesota. And I'm just going to leave it at that and call on Luke.
Hey everybody, my name's Luke McCormick. I can be found as Cell Ear on various platforms. I do web project management and analysis and occasional programming in the San Francisco Bay Area near Oakland. And I will call on Irina.
Hi, my name is Irina Zaks. I'm a web developer and site builder, and I'm here to learn more about custom entities, and I also started conversation about layout paragraphs.
Wait, Tim Stalker, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Tim Stalker. I live in Louisville, Colorado. I work for the University of Colorado, Denver in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. You might see me as John Quest on GitHub or other places. That's my handle. Thank you. Let's try Izzy.
Hi, I'm Izzy. I'm a freelance developer in Vancouver, west coast of Canada. Glad to be here. I'll pass it on to Justin.
Hey, I'm Justin Kaiser. I work for a nonprofit in Muncie, Indiana, and I finally released my version of OpenAI this afternoon that has the alt text module included in it. So I'm kind of excited about the automatic alt text generation.
Jeff, do you want to go next?
Sure. My camera I didn't have set up on my laptop to use, and I'd have to get out of this meeting to show it. So, and you're all better off anyway. So previously I've been a Java developer for a long time. Before that, I was a C developer and did all kinds of stuff. Basically retired, although I hate to think of it in those terms. And I'm trying to learn backdrop, and this is part of that process. That's about it. Thanks.
I think Steve.
Okay,
Oh,
Steve.
Steve and then Martin.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve. I'm from South Yorkshire in the UK. I look after a few backdrop websites, as well as a few other ones as well, not to mention those. So yeah, I'm here to participate, of course. Thank you.
Martin?
I'm Martin Price. I'm Yorkshire Pudding around Backdrop, and I'm a backdrop developer in Northeast England.
Okay, and I think that's everybody, but except for Alejandro. And yeah, tell you what, let me make one more announcement, and then Alejandro, you can introduce yourself and just start, okay? My final announcement is, well, might be a bit premature. Martin and I and Jen were working on the Backdrop Live site yesterday, getting it live. You can now add sessions. It would be great if people started to flesh out the schedule as quickly as possible. I don't know if anybody has tested registration yet, but you could help us out, test registration. I think it's working, and if it's not, let us know. And the Backdrop Live will be April 3rd and 4th, so hope to see you all there. I think any other announcements before we go into Alejandro's presentation? Okay, let's turn it over to you, Alejandro. Introduce yourself and go to it.
Hi, I'm Alejandro. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. I work as a freelancer, developing and also contributing with Backdrop core and contrib I'm also a musician. I work with music groups. And so the presentation today, Tim asked me to kind of revisit a presentation I did for Backdrop Live last time, which was about custom entities. The the apps that I develop with Backdrop, they are all very entity heavy, custom entity heavy. Basically registration systems for music competitions and music events. So I've been working with entities for many, many years, starting in Drupal 7 and now in Backdrop. So I'm going to try and share the screen, Tim. I'm not sure if I have the power to do that, but let's give
You
it a try.
should.
Looks like I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to mention that I put together 4 progressively more complex examples, and you can find those on GitHub, on my GitHub, RG Piano. I'm a pianist, that's why RG Piano, and I'm from Argentina, that's why RG. And you can find that rgpiano/ed. So these 4, I'm going to be talking about maybe a couple of these examples. The easiest one, which is Ed 1 and then Ed 2. But I encourage you to look at the other ones. They are heavily documented, so you can learn a lot just from reading the code there. So first, let me start to discuss what is an entity. There are different ways of defining entities. I think the easiest way to understand it is if you think of a PHP object that contains data gathered from the database and data that will be saved to the database. So an entity is an object that lives in memory. When you request a page, PHP executes, a bunch of code. Among that is perhaps, let's say you want to see a node. You type the URL for a node. So Backdrop will retrieve from the database and will build an object that will stay in the memory and will process it, and it will spit it back to your browser in the form of a page, basically. So the entity is that object that stays in the memory. So that's one way of looking at it. If you ever use Devel in your Backdrop site, you know that you can do a DPM and you can basically dump an object to see the content. So this is a node object, and you can see that by just simply going to execute PHP and then doing this. So this is the first node. This is the node object. This is the node entity, basically. And the way that Backdrop built this is by retrieving information from different tables in the database, including the node table, the field data field tags table, which contains the tags for that particular node, the field data body table. So retrieving all of that and putting it together as an entity. Conversely, you can do the opposite. You could just build your entity in memory and then save it. And Backdrop will basically know where to save that information. So in the node table, in the field data, field tags, in the image table, and so forth. By the way, feel free to interrupt with questions if you have like a burning question. Moving on a little bit now here. So what is an entity type? Well, I think the best way to understand it is to, those of you who are familiar with Backdrop, you know that Backdrop has nodes, it has taxonomy terms, it has comments, files, and users. So these are the 5 entity types that Backdrop provides out of the box, basically. As you just saw, you can load one of those entities. In this case, I loaded a node. This node is an object of this particular entity type, which is called the node entity type. Okay. All right. So what are some commonalities among all these different entities? All of these entities have an API provided by Backdrop that allows us to create, load, save, and delete and display those entities. You saw here in my code, I loaded the node by doing a node load, but I could have done something like this as well. Entity load, specify the entity type. This is a node. and the node ID, or the ID of the entity. If I did that, I would get basically exactly the same result. So this function is provided by Backdrop as part of the entity API. So there are other commonalities. All of these entities or entity types have properties. Some people call them fields that can have the same purpose. One of those properties holds the ID of the entity. In this case, is the NID, the node ID. Another property holds the label of that entity. In this case, in the case of node, this is called the title. So that's the label. I'm trying to find it. Here it is. And then another property holds the bundle of that entity. I'm going to talk a little more about bundles in just a second. In this case, the property is called type, and it holds this property is telling me that this entity is of the post bundle. Okay. All right. Just moving on a little bit. So what are bundles? Bundles are almost like subtype of an entity type. So if you have nodes, the page, the card, the post, those are all bundles of nodes. If you look at files, you get a document, an image, and audio, and you can see that in action actually by going to structure, file types, and you see there audio, document, image, video. These are all bundles of the entity type called file. Some entity types do not have bundles, like for example, comments, they do not have bundles. So bundles receive different names in Backdrop. For nodes, they are called content types, so page, card, etc. For taxonomy terms, they are called vocabularies. For files, they're called file types. And users and comments do not have bundles in Backdrop. So it's a single bundle, basically. So what bundles allow us to attach different fields to each bundle. And you can see that in action. If you look at content types, for example, you probably know that posts contain specific fields, like the tags and the image, that are not present in other bundles, like page. Page does not contain those two fields. So that's what a bundle allows us to do. Basically, it allows us to attach specific fields to specific bundles. It also allows us to, bundles allows us to filter entities by bundle. For example, you can create a view that only shows pages. So you are effectively filtering nodes by the bundle, by page, or or post and whatever. So before moving on to the examples, one more thing that I want to mention. There are two flavors of fields. There are properties and there are field API fields. The field API fields are the ones that you attach through the Manage Field tab. If you look at the page, let me actually go back and show you the post content type here. So body, tags, and images, those are all field API fields. You can remove them if you want it, and you can add them back if you want it. On the other hand, there are properties, and properties look different here on the manage fields. You notice that title doesn't, you cannot basically delete a title. You cannot add a title here or a second title. They are called node module elements in this case. And these are what we call properties. They are fixed and they are common to all bundles of that entity type. So if you go to page, for example, you will notice that page also contains the title. Okay. And if you create a new content type, we call it test, by default, that content type will contain the property title. Okay. Backdrop also adds the body, but you can easily delete it. So that's a field API field. One thing I want to point out is the fact that those properties are actually stored in the node table. So we're going to just share quickly here my database. If you filter by node, I'm showing here the node table. So you can see here that if I look at the structure, the title is actually stored in the node database or table rather. On the other hand, if I look for body, you will notice that this is a field API field and it's stored separately from that specific node table. So that's another important distinction. Properties are always stored in the table, the kind of the home table or the base table, they call it, of the entity itself. But field API fields are stored in their own tables. All right, so just going back to my presentation here, 1 second. Okay. All right, so let's talk about custom entities real quick. Why do we want to use custom entities? And by the way, there are a bunch of contrib modules that provide custom entity types, like registration, organic groups, Uber cards. They all provide their own entities or entity types. So why do you want to use entity types, custom entity types? Well, nodes can be adapted. I remember when I started developing for Drupal 7, I did everything with nodes. So for example, if I wanted to store, let's say, a room for a registration system, I created a new content type called room, and I use that content type, that node bundle, to store my rooms. But there's a lot of overhead that comes with bundles. Bundles have a bunch of things that you probably don't need. For example, whether it's published or not, whether it's scheduled or not, and so forth. So custom entities provide more flexibility, and they are often lighter to use. So that's how I got into custom entities, basically, just looking for a way to get out of nodes, node hell, as I called it. So how does Backdrop help you create entity types? Backdrop provides an API that will allow you to create entity types very easily. Once you have created your entity type, you have an API that allows you to create the entities, like loading a node or loading an entity or saving it and so forth. I'm going to show you some examples there. So there's two requirements to create a custom entity type. You need a table to store basically the unique ID, the label, and the bundle name for the entity. These are the minimum requirements. You can have other columns to store, for example, the user ID of the person who created the entity. And then you also need a PHP class to instantiate an entity object. So if I go back here, what you see here on the left, it's a PHP object. This is an instance of a class called node. Okay, it's a PHP class, and it's defined in core. So a Backdrop uses that class to instantiate this object. Good. So this is the node object that I just showed you. So the properties that you see here is an ID, type, and title. These are the minimum requirements. Those three properties are required for any custom entity. They don't need to be called an ID. In fact, you probably don't want to call it an ID. You could call it, let's say, if this is a room, you could call it room ID or something like that. And it doesn't have to be called title. It could be called label, for example, or anything else, or name, and so forth. And this is where they are stored in the database. So let me just go directly to the examples. I'm going to start with demo number 1. And I have downloaded that project from the repository. And I will enable the first one. One thing I want to just mention real quick is that if you download this project from my repo, be sure to fully uninstall each demo before you enable the next one. Otherwise, you'll get a clash. You basically kill your site. So I'm gonna enable the first one. And the first one is just very, very simple. Let me just share the code with you. And I think it's great to just understand the basics. So the two things that you need this is basically the module, the ed1.module. This is my main module file. You need to implement hook entity info. This will basically describe the custom entity. I'm creating a custom entity type called student. You also need to tell Backdrop which column of your database will hold the ID for the entity. In this case, the column is called student-ID, and which column will hold the label for each of the entities. In this case, it's a column called name, and I'm going to show you those in just a second. So let me open the install file. This creates the table. This is a table called student, and this table has the following columns: student ID, which will hold the ID of my student; name, which will hold the name or the label for the student. And I also have two other columns called UID, which holds the user ID of the creator of the entity, and created, which holds a Unix timestamp, basically the time when that particular entity was created. Okay. So this creates my table. Okay. And if I show you the database now, you will see that that particular table has been created. I need to refresh this. And you can see here that it has those 4 columns, and currently there's nothing in that table. Okay. So the next thing that you need is you need to, let me actually, no, not that. Let me go to my code. Yes, that was it. Okay, so the other thing that you need is, going back to the module, you need to create a class that will hold your entity. And this is what Backdrop will use to instantiate the object. So I call this student, and this is the class. It's a very simple class. It extends the core entity class, and it defines my properties: student ID, name, user ID, and the created property. And by default, you need to extend or override 4 methods in entity. So one of those methods is
Alejandro, we're seeing HT access on screen.
I'm sorry?
We were seeing HT access on screen just then.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, I got the wrong screen there. Okay. Thank you. Okay, this should be it. So I was saying that the student class extends entity, and I have basically the properties all defined there. So the methods that I overriding are entity type, label, which returns basically the name column, ID, which returns the ID, the student ID column, and URI, which returns the path to see to display the entity itself. So you see, it's very, very short, very simple. And then I'm using the the default or the core entity controller here, which is entity database storage controller. And I'm not extending that. It's just provided by Backdrop. And that's all, basically, that's all I need. I'm also telling Backdrop that this entity type is not fieldable. So I cannot add fields. This is just going to show those properties that I discussed earlier, basically the student ID, the name, the user ID, and the created. And that's it. That's all you need. And of course, you also need to implement autoload info because you need to tell Backdrop where to find that class. The student class is in this particular file. So with just those simple lines, if I go back to my site here, I can basically go to devel, and I can start creating my entities here. So I'm going to create an entity by using entity create, and I'm going to call it, this is a student type, so I have to type student, and then I'm gonna just leave the second parameter empty. It's not really needed at this level. And then I'm going to just dump it so that you can see that entity there. So you can see that Backdrop created that object. Everything is blank right now. This was an entity that I created in memory. It has not been saved. So what I can do next is start assigning. For example, the name will be John Smith. The user ID is going to be 1, which is me. I'm going to assign the created request time. And I don't want to assign a student ID because that is filled automatically by Backdrop when I save the entity. Okay. So now I'm going to dump this after. Notice that I'm not saving that entity yet. So now you can see that it has been populated. The isActive revision is added by the controller automatically. I don't need to worry about that. So the next thing I'm going to do is to actually save. And this is because my object is extending the entity class, which is in core. That entity class provides the save method. So I don't have to worry about creating a method to save the entity. I just called save. And if I do that, you're going to see here that my ID has been already populated. If I go to my database, you're going to see that if I refresh here, there is one entry, one row already added with the entity, the student ID, the name, the user ID, and the created that I defined over there. Okay. So after I've done this, I can easily continue using the API to, for example, load. Let me start sharing here. Let's say I want to load now. So I'm going to student is entity load, student ID 1. So when I do that, okay, there. So when I do that, you're going to see that Backdrop retrieved the database information and created that object for me. I could, for example, modify things like the name, Johnny Smith, and then save it again. And then when I load it, you're going to see that that has been updated to Johnny Smith. So, and so forth. So that's basically all you need to create a custom entity type. The rest of the code that you see there contains some additional things that make it more user-friendly. And I'll show you a few things quickly. I'm defining permissions for creating or viewing or editing students. I have created some menu paths as well, or router paths to allow me to see the students or to create new students and so forth. I have also created convenience functions. One of them is student load to basically to avoid having to write this long function there. It also helps Backdrop load students automatically. When I do that, for example, if you look at this router path, you see the placeholder here. This placeholder is telling Backdrop to look for a function called student load. And that will load that student and send it to basically to this function student view. Okay, and so forth. So I want to demo some of that in my site. So if I just type the path student, you're going to see this table is produced by that code that I just showed you, where it shows basically all my student entities in the database. I can click view, and that will show just like a node, basically. I'm doing that. I can do edit. This form I'm also providing in my code. So this is not provided by Backdrop. And you can also delete and so forth. And you can also create a new student. And so that is created. Notice that this is student ID number 2. So that basically wraps up the kind of the simplest approach you can use for custom entities. Now, notice that this custom entities that you just saw is not fieldable. So you cannot add fields. And I'll show you, I noticed that I have maybe up to 10 minutes. I want to leave some time for other questions and things, but I want to show you a little bit of the next example, which actually creates a fieldable entity so that you notice what the differences are for that. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. Has anybody had any questions so far about this part?
I have a real quick question about you had like 3 fields in there, is active revision ID and create date. And I think you said the ID was automatically generated by the system. And is that also true for is active revision and created date?
No, the created date you have to populate yourself. In fact, your custom entity types, they don't need to have a created date. You could just not save that. And if you when you there are many ways in which you can approach that. The way I showed you is by directly assigning. Let me actually go back here.
That was a Unix timestamp, right? How did you
Yes.
come up with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Unix timestamp, if there's basically a global function called request time.
Okay.
If you do that, you're going to see the request time for the page request I just made.
Okay.
This is the Unix timestamp. So what I did was I did assign it like this. By doing that, I basically assigned it to that particular property. I mean, there are other ways of doing this, and some of the more advanced examples show another way. For example, you could do that in your controller. Okay, when you can extend the core controller and you can actually pre-populate some of the fields. There's a method in the controller called build, not build content. It's let me check here. What is it called? But you can extend that and just pre-populate all of those. And just let me show you what it's called here. The controller that I'm using is just a core controller. So yes, the method is called create. So you could extend that method and then just pre-populate, for example, the created column there. But let me go back and just show a little bit of this second example. Anybody has any other questions? Okay. So what I need to do is I need to fully uninstall this first one. And that means not only disabling, but also uninstalling. And then I'll open the second one. And so one thing I want to show you on this one is, let me go back to my code, VS Code here. So add to module. So the opening part, the hook entity info, you can see here it's a lot shorter. Okay, it just has the basic stuff. The which entity class I'm going to use, which controller class, what the base table is in my database, whether it's fieldable, and the entity key. So which column is going to hold the ID of the entity, which column will hold the label of the entity. Now, on the second example, this is a little more complex. Okay. First of all, this example creates two bundles of students, and they are hard-coded. One of those bundles is called basic student, and the other one is called adult student. So basically what I can do with this is I can attach different fields to basic student and to adult students. They do not have to share the same fields. This is what bundles allow me to do, basically. I also need to tell Backdrop what column is going to hold the bundle name. So if you take a look at my database real quick, you're going to see that, let me first of all refresh this. And you're going to see now that there is a column called bundle, okay? And that column will hold the name of the bundle for the entity, either basic student or adult student. So that's a new thing. So I needed to tell Backdrop which column holds that. Going back to here, second. Oops, I have the wrong one here. There. Okay, so if you now go there's a couple of paths that can work here, and one of the new paths that I added is admin slash the student bundle. Okay, so this one it's the UI that I actually coded in this example that allows you to add fields. For example, basic students is one of my bundles. I want to add one that's, for example, age, and this is a number. And just all of that. And now I want to maybe add another field to the adult student. So you get the idea. So then when I go to my student list, it looks the same as the previous example. When I click create student now, I have created this page that allows me to choose which bundle of students I want to create. So for example, I want to create a basic student. And so you notice here that this is the label. This is common to all bundles. And then age is the field that I added to my particular entity type or bundle, rather. So I can also modify the display, so I can actually show. Right now, it shows decimal points because I should have gotten rid of those decimal points in the in here. So you can still do that by just editing the age, and there shouldn't be any decimal points. Well, I can't do it now because there's data in the database already. So, but you get the idea. Okay, so that's how basically by just simply specifying the let me go back to here. By specifying this bundles and by also specifying fieldable true, Backdrop allows me to add fields to that bundle. I also need to say where the field API needs to add that tab. The tab that says manage fields and manage displays. I need to tell that the field API where what path to use. And so this is hard coded here for adult students and basic students. There is also an access argument here so that only people who have administered students permissions can actually add fields to and can edit the field for that particular bundle. and so forth. So that's kind of in a nutshell. The next two examples, the next one actually is allows you to create dynamic bundles. The ones you just saw, those bundles are hard-coded. The next example uses a config file, a JSON file, to store the names of dynamic bundles. So the code actually shows you how to do that. And then the last example is an integration with Entity Plus. And the cool thing about integrating with Entity Plus is that it will create views fields for you automatically. So that you can create views of students, for example, and you have access to all those properties and all those fields. And Entity Plus does that for you automatically. Same thing with tokens. So if you enable entity tokens and your entity type depends on Entity Plus, then you will have access to those tokens as well automatically. Okay, so there's a lot of complexity in the examples. I'm not saying that you will kind of understand everything in an hour. It may take, for you to kind of play around with each level of the examples to really understand how things are working. It is a complex API, but I think, the first example shows clearly that you can actually start playing with it with just 15 lines of code. And if you program, if you develop in Backdrop and you know how to create, for example, forms, then you're pretty much all set to start creating your own custom entities. Not sure if I put everybody to sleep. It's a lot of talking. Sorry. You have the examples there. They're easier to, yeah.
Could you quickly go over what you have to do you said you do the one and then you move to the next, then you have to delete the first one stuff. Could you review that process?
Right.
I'll
Yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely. Yeah, let me actually, I'll just show it to you here. So, there's because of the way these examples are created, they share a lot of the same code and the same tables and everything. So you'll get a clash if you don't disable and uninstall things. And one thing, if you're playing with examples 2, 3, or 4, if you have added any fields to those entity types, you need to delete those fields first. So I added the age field. I'm gonna just remove that first. The second thing I want to do is to delete any entities that I've created. Just I'm cleaning the system basically. And once you do that, you go to the modules and disable it. And then make sure that you go to uninstall and then uninstall that one. So that will remove all the tables from the database. And then you can go ahead and enable the next level. Yeah, and the next level actually contains also menus. So if you go to structure, you're going to see, maybe not, maybe it's the next level. Yeah. Oh, okay, here it is. Student bundles. Yeah, so that menu is there. So now you can create your own bundles here. You could just create that, for example, and that will add it to the list. And then you can add fields to that and so forth. Yeah. Any other questions?
RG Piano, I missed a few minutes of your presentation. Maybe I missed this, but what is stored in config? Can you transfer entities from one site to another with config, or is it all in the database?
No, entities are always stored in the database. And this is true for nodes, this is for files. The bundle definitions can be stored on config files. You can move bundle definition from one site to another. Yes, you can definitely do that. But you have to look at the third example to see that. Example 2 has bundles, but they are hard-coded on the code. They are defined in code. So you cannot, as soon as you enable the module in a separate site, you're going to have those two bundles, basic student and adult student, regardless. But if you look at example number 3, yes, that configuration file, you can export it from one side and import it on another side. But you're only moving the bundle definition, in other words, the kind of the content type, but not the actual entity. So John Cash, Mary Smith, and all my students are going to remain in my database originally. So, but you have to do a database dump and then import the database or use feeds. Yeah, you can use feeds as well. To use
Understood.
feeds, you need a contrib module actually that I maintain. It's called an entity feeds or something, or custom entity feeds or something like that.
I have a question and a comment. I guess the question's probably easily answered if I'd been paying close attention from the very beginning. But is there a public Git repo for the things that you're showing here?
Yeah. Let me post it on the chat here.
Also, there's a link to it in the event node for today. Events.
Well, I mean, my comment here is that was one of the greatest introductory backdrop web Drupal programming tutorials I've ever seen. That was fantastic.
You're too kind, Luke.
So, I'm so happy this got recorded.
Great.
That
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
this becomes one of our crown jewels now.
Well, thanks, Luke. You're very, very kind. There's not a lot of literature out there, not even for Drupal 7 about custom entities. So I'm glad that it got recorded also, because a lot of these can be also applied to people who are still doing Drupal 7.
Yeah. I loved your ERD diagrams that you showed in the beginning, showing the table relationships and stuff. That was eye-opening. That was great.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad.
It was. Looks like
Thank
Izzy
you.
has a question.
I have to leave now. Just wanted to say thank you very much and looking forward to reconnecting with everyone next week for more backdrop development. Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. And I have to go in like 2 minutes also.
When you were learning the API for entity, where did you find the resources to know what's in that API? Is it on the backdrop site?
Well, the API itself is documented. It's usually, if you look at, I think this is the name of the file. If you look at the code base, all the hooks are explained there. All these entities entity types are created by implementing hooks. Now, that will not teach you how to do that. I think there's a pretty good example in the examples for developers module. If you open that, you'll see an example of a very simple custom entity type. So I think I learned from there. There were a couple of other tutorials online for Drupal 7. I also looked at the way things are done with core entities.
Great.
Izzy had a question. Do you have time?
Can you quickly explain why you would use custom entities as opposed to content type?
Yeah, one of the main reasons is I think the convenience of having. Let me just give you a little background here. So my web applications are very, very complex in terms of competition registration. You have a student, you have a teacher, you have a room, you have a time block, you have a time slot, you have the actual registration. So that's 6 or 7 different content types. So things became just overwhelming with nodes. Just handling all these content types was a nightmare. Content also nodes add a lot of stuff that you don't need. As I mentioned when I started the presentation, nodes, for example, contain properties related to scheduling. When is a node going to be published? It has comments sometimes. I mean, you can eliminate the comments. So there was a lot of overhead. So doing it this way allowed me to do it more cleanly. So each of the entities have a separate set of functions and its own API basically that allow me to do things more cleanly. The system is so huge, and I'm just one person doing this. So this was also for mental sanity, as opposed to just keeping track of 100, so not 100, but 10 different content types and creating different functions in different parts of the code. This was easier. So that's one of the reasons. If you have, I think content types is a perfectly valid solution for simple things. When I started developing for Drupal 7, everything was content types, and I used rules a lot. Instead of going into the code, instead of creating custom modules, I just used rules and content types, and that was enough for my first system. But was very, very simple, and it was fine. But then as things got more complex, I found that it was easier to go the other route.
Alejandro mentioned you had to go, so want to
Yeah.
be respectful of that. If you need to
All right.
leave, thank you so much. This was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Monica,
Thanks for the invitation. Okay.
It
Luke
really
is
was.
absolutely correct.
This is the second one I've just watched of this, and it gets better every time.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
I hope Alejandro has something in mind for the next Backdrop Live.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do, let's go ahead and end this meeting, but if anybody is willing to stick around, we do need some topics. And Jen, if you're still here, can we talk about a topic for another user group meeting? But let's go ahead and end the recording. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.